Welcome back, deep divers. Ready to plunge into a story that's captivating, but also a little unsettling.
Yeah, definitely.
We're talking about the Marcos dynasty in the Philippines.
A family practically woven into their nation's story, almost like royalty,
Yeah.
but with a history that's, well, it's like a Shakespearean tragedy.
It's a fascinating case study, how political dynasties build their image, how they manipulate narratives, and how those echoes from the past can have an impact for generations.
Absolutely.
So you gave us a ton of great sources for this deep dive. We've got that episode of NPR's Throughline podcast, which does a really good job laying out the whole saga. Then we've got pieces of Ferdinand Marcos's diary, a look right into the mind of the guy who, for a while, held a nation's fate in his hands.
Right, and to add a little, well, let's just call it political flair, we've even got stuff on Imelda Marcos's, shall we say, unique fashion choices.
Yes, those details, even though they might seem superficial, actually tell us a lot about how the Marcoses projected power and crafted their image, especially on the world stage. So what we're aiming for today is to untangle this really complex and kind of contradictory story. How did this family climb so high? How did they fall so dramatically? And maybe the most interesting question, how did they manage to stage a comeback decades later?
It's a story that goes way beyond the Philippines. It speaks to how powerful political dynasties can be, that pull of nostalgia, and just how fragile democracy really is.
Okay, let's break this story down. We'll start at the beginning with young Ferdinand Marcos. What we've got paints a picture of a guy seemingly destined for greatness. But was he actually that exceptional? Or was his rise just a facade?
That is the million-dollar question. Even from a young age, Ferdinand had this remarkable knack for promoting himself and shaping his own narrative.
We're talking about a guy who, at 18, gets caught up in a murder trial. And not just any murder, the assassination of Julio Nalindezan, a political rival of his dad.
Yeah, and this trial becomes this turning point in Ferdinand's life.
Right.
Despite being the prime suspect, he turns the courtroom into his own stage.
I can picture it now. A young Ferdinand, perfectly dressed in a white suit, giving this super passionate and articulate defense that just captivated the nation, almost like a play.
And somehow, against the odds, he's acquitted. The court says it would be a tragedy to lock up a young man with so much potential.
Wow. It's like his acquittal becomes the foundation of his legend. He's not just a suspect anymore. He's a brilliant legal mind, a man marked for greatness. It's a powerful example of how he could manipulate things to his advantage, even as a young man.
And you see this pattern throughout his career, the ability to twist stories, to come off as a hero, even when faced with controversy.
And then as he gets older, that tendency to embellish his story just gets stronger. Like, get this, he claimed to have more war medals than Audie Murphy, the famous American World War II hero.
Yeah, his war record has been challenged by historians, but the point is he knew how powerful a heroic image could be, especially in a country that had just gone through World War II.
Makes you think, doesn't it? People are drawn to leaders who seem strong and resilient, especially when things are uncertain or scary. And Ferdinand Marcos, he was a pro at playing into that.
Oh, absolutely. He had this uncanny ability to tack into what the nation was worried about and then position himself as the answer, the savior who could lead them to a better future.
But, no political dynasty is complete without a captivating partner.
Right.
And Imelda Romualdez, a former beauty queen who became this political powerhouse, Ferdinand found the perfect match for his strongman image.
Imelda was way more than just a glamorous sidekick. She was a sharp political operator in her own right, someone who really understood image and symbolism. Together, they became this power couple, projecting sophistication and progress on a global scale.
And nothing said New Philippines quite like Imelda's famous turno gowns with those big butterfly sleeves. They were like works of art.
Oh yeah, those gowns were designed to make you feel national pride and a sense of modernity. They were a visual representation of the Philippines' desire to be a big player on the world stage.
Style is substance, right. They knew how important looks were in shaping public perception.
Exactly. They were masters of manipulating how they were seen. And for a while, it worked perfectly. They cultivated this aura of being untouchable, like they were destined to lead the Philippines into a golden age.
But, as we all know, behind that shiny facade, a much darker reality was starting to emerge.
And that's where things start to take a darker turn.
Mhm.
Their image was established. Ferdinand and Imelda, they reached the top. Ferdinand's elected president in 65. He's promising this new society for the Philippines.
Right.
And there was real optimism, at least at first. Ferdinand starts these big infrastructure projects, strengthens ties with the U.S. and the Philippine economy. It starts growing. For a time, it really did look like they were on track to deliver that modern, prosperous Philippines they
It
promised.
was like that whole Camelot thing, wasn't it? Like a Filipino version of John and Jackie Kennedy.
Oh,
All youthful energy and glamour.
exactly.
But we know that facade started to crack.
Yeah, the cracks they began to show. Economic inequality, it gets worse. Social unrest starts brewing under the surface. You get student protests and a communist insurgency. It gains traction in the countryside.
And how did Ferdinand handle these challenges to his authority?
He basically dug in deeper. In his diaries from this time, you see a man wrestling with his ambitions, his anxieties. He writes about believing he was destined to, save the Philippines from communism, even if it meant turning to authoritarian measures.
It's kind of chilling to read that knowing what was coming. 1972, he declares martial law, saying it was necessary to restore order and put down that communist threat.
Overnight, the Philippines changes. Political rivals are arrested, the press is silenced, and this atmosphere of fear just descends on the country. The very freedoms that Ferdinand had promised to protect are systematically taken away.
It really shows you how fast democracy can be eroded.
Right.
When power gets concentrated in one person's hands, even someone who got there through democratic means.
And the Marcoses used martial law to tighten their control even more. Textbooks are rewritten, they commission these grand portraits of themselves, like emerging from a mythical bamboo stalk. Just like Malakas and Maganda, the legendary first man and woman in Philippine folklore.
It's almost as if they were trying to write themselves into the very origin story of the Philippines, like claiming some kind of divine right to rule.
Exactly, weaving themselves into the national narrative, making it seem like their rule wasn't just inevitable, but essential for the nation to survive.
But while they're projecting this image of strength and stability to the outside world, the reality for a lot of Filipinos was pretty grim.
Oh, absolutely. The sources, they detail widespread human rights abuses during this time. Torture, people disappearing, extrajudicial killings, all done under the banner of national security.
Yeah.
It's a dark, brutal period in Philippine history.
And yet, they still managed to keep up this appearance of normalcy, even glamour, on the world stage. Imelda, especially, she becomes a global icon, jet-setting around the world, meeting with leaders, giving speeches at the UN, all while wearing those incredible turno gowns.
Remember those butterfly sleeves we talked about? Well, they take on a whole new meaning under martial law.
Oh, I see.
Some people saw them as a symbol of Imelda's extravagance, how disconnected she was from the suffering of her own people.
That contrast is striking, isn't it? This picture of wealth and grandeur set against a backdrop of oppression and human rights abuses.
And all the while, this lavish lifestyle, it's being funded by money taken right out of the Philippine treasury. Millions, maybe even billions of dollars spent on Imelda's shopping sprees, her art collection, her over-the-top parties.
It's a story of excess and corruption that's hard to grasp. But they couldn't hold on to power forever,
But
right?
no regime, no matter how strong, can resist the tide of history forever. And for the Marcoses, the tide starts turning with the assassination of Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr. in 1983.
Aquino, a prominent opposition leader who'd been exiled by Marcos, returns to the Philippines and is gunned down as he steps off the plane at Manila International Airport. It was a shock that energized the opposition and really exposed just how brutal the Marcos regime had become.
That assassination was a turning point.
Right.
It shattered that illusion of stability and unity that the Marcoses had worked so hard to build.
And it sets the stage for one of the most remarkable events in recent history, the People Power Revolution.
In '86, millions of Filipinos take to the streets of Manila. They're demanding an end to Marcos's rule. A peaceful uprising, it really shows the courage and resilience of the Filipino people.
We've got one of our sources, Tita. Her father was actually Imelda's dressmaker. She gives a first-hand account of those incredible days. Describes being caught up in the protests, feeling this wave of hope and solidarity as people from all walks of life came together to demand change.
It's a powerful reminder that even the strongest dictatorships can be overthrown when people find the courage to resist.
Faced with this massive show of people power, the Marcoses are forced to flee into exile, a stunning fall from grace for a family that had seemed invincible.
But even in exile, the Marcoses, they never gave up on their ambition to get back in power. And it's in this next chapter that you see Imelda's political smarts really shine.
She really took over, didn't she? Went from disgraced first lady to this figure of sympathy, even reverence.
Yeah, she cultivated this image of the grieving widow, her husband, a misunderstood leader who'd been wrongly attacked, and she played that role perfectly.
One of the strangest things about this whole period was her refusal to bury Ferdinand's body for almost 30 years.
Right.
His embalmed body was on display, this macabre symbol of the family's lasting influence and their determination to reclaim their place in Philippine history.
It was a brilliant, if kinda creepy, political strategy. She understood the power of symbols and stories, and she used them to keep the Marcos name alive in the public's mind.
And in the end, that strategy worked. In 2016, Ferdinand Marcos is finally buried in the Hero Cemetery in Manila, a symbolic win for the family and a sign of their growing influence.
And just a few years later, 2022, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., the son of the former dictator, is elected president of the Philippines. A remarkable comeback, showing the lasting power of the Marcos name and the family's incredible ability to rewrite history.
It's hard to believe, isn't it? A family that was once kicked out of power in a popular uprising manages to climb all the way back to the top. It's a testament to their political skill and the enduring appeal of that carefully crafted narrative of theirs.
It's just wild, right? How a family, once forced out, could come back so strong. What does it tell us about the Philippines today? What did our sources show us?
Well, they highlight a lot of factors at play, like there's this generational gap. Lots of Filipinos, they didn't live through martial law themselves, so they're more open to the Marcoses' revised version of history. Plus, they've mastered social media, which lets them bypass traditional media and get their message straight to the people. So are they playing on this nostalgia? For a time that a lot of Filipinos might see through rose-colored glasses.
Exactly. Bongbong's campaign really leaned into this longing for what people remember as stability and economic good times during his father's early years. But they conveniently forget those later years, the human rights violations, the corruption.
It really shows how history can be used for political gain. These sources just scream the need for critical thinking, questioning the stories we hear, especially from those in power.
No doubt. We can't just passively absorb information. It's crucial to ask questions about the sources, consider different viewpoints, and ultimately make our own informed decisions. The Marcotoses' success in reshaping their narrative, it's a huge lesson in media literacy and critical thinking, especially in our world where information is everywhere.
This dive into the Marcos dynasty has been fascinating, but also a little unsettling. It makes you think about how history repeats itself, how fragile democracy really is.
It does. The Philippines' experience is a stark reminder that the fight for freedom and democratic values never ends. We have to be vigilant, engaged, and willing to challenge the status quo if we want to protect those hard-won rights.
So what can we learn from this epic story? Ambition, corruption, exile, and a political comeback. What's the one thing you really want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the biggest takeaway is this. Understanding history in all its complexity is essential for navigating the present and building our future. We need to be aware of how narratives can be twisted, and we can't be afraid to challenge those narratives, hold leaders accountable, and actively defend democracy.
It's been an eye-opening exploration of a key period in Philippine history, with lessons for everyone. If this has piqued your interest, I urge you to dig deeper into the sources we discussed. Watch those documentaries, read those historical accounts, and form your own opinions.
Because the Marcos story goes beyond borders. It's a warning for anyone concerned about protecting democratic values and fighting authoritarianism, a fight that's still going on globally.
Absolutely. And if you found this deep dive insightful, don't forget to subscribe. We'll be back next week with another compelling story, helping you make sense of our complex world. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.